Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, honoring Arbor Day on April 26th, with an ongoing commitment to sustainable stewardship and conservation of Missouri's forests. ChooseWood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
If he were a character in a novel, people would probably chastise the author for creating a character who's too over the top. We speak with some well-known people such as Tom Wolfe, the writer, and Robert Osborne, the film historian, and get their views on, whether or not they will be remembered forever and whether they care. And, it's just a fun little piece.
I'm Sarah Fensky. The new documentary premiering on 9 PBS this Sunday is a must-see for opera lovers, for history buffs, and for fans of Martin Scorsese. The acclaimed filmmaker is front and center in the Oratorio, a documentary with Martin Scorsese. The one-hour film digs into a historic performance at St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, the 1826 one-night-only event organized by Mozart's librettist marked the arrival of Italian opera in the U.S.
This concert firmly set New York City on course to become the diverse and vibrant center for the arts it is today.
Martin Scorsese tells the story of a performance that made history, and after nearly 200 years is recreated.
This place is just breathing stories and lives long forgotten.
But while Scorsese takes center stage on camera, he is not the film's director. That role was played by our guest today. Anne Rothberg is the co-writer, co-director, and co-producer of The Oratorio, a documentary with Martin Scorsese. She's also a native of Clayton, and she joins us now. So Anne Rothberg, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah, for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
So I understand this was your first feature-length film. What was it like directing one of Hollywood's greatest directors in that moment?
It was just an incredible experience, which I'll never forget, but it was incredibly intimidating.
I bet.
And we were all very nervous, to be behind the camera, filming one of the greatest directors ever. But he was so incredibly gracious and kind, and we had worked with his team to create the narration that he was going to provide, but he gave us some extra time, which was just lovely, and knew that we would need some interviews, and it was just a dream come true.
So I gotta ask, how did you get Scorsese to be on camera in the first place? Like, what brought him into this project?
He had a close association with this church. He had grown up in the neighborhood. This was his family church. He was an altar boy at the church. He sang in the choir and really had a deep connection and still has a connection with the church. The church is home to the 150-year-old urban organ, which is falling apart, as you can imagine, after 150 years. And Martin Scorsese is on the committee to restore this magnificent instrument. And, the church reached out to him and said, would you like to lend your voice to this documentary? And, we were absolutely beyond thrilled when he said yes.
So people who've been tourists are probably thinking, St. Patrick's Cathedral, I know what that is. This is not that same building. What is the history of this St. Patrick's Cathedral?
This church actually is much older, and it was built by the same architect as the larger St. Patrick's, but this one is in Little Italy, and it really has been a cornerstone of that neighborhood for over 2 centuries. It's, a place where the Irish community originally worshipped, and then the Italians came in and became the primary worshipers. And now the neighborhood is changing a lot and is becoming more and more Chinese. And the Chinese, enjoy services at this church. It's really an incredible place.
So I get the sense that this was, these were a lot of working class Catholics that went to this church. How did they land this groundbreaking oratorio that, sort of introduces opera to this country?
Well, the company that performed, the Garcias, were traveling in New York, and Lorenzo da Ponte, who was Mozart's librettist, really wanted more New Yorkers to know about Italian opera or opera in general. New York was more or less a cultural backwater at the time, and really took a backseat to Philadelphia and Boston and Baltimore. And I think this was, Da Ponte's way of educating New Yorkers. And the great thing is that this was an event that, as you say, every working class person could attend. It wasn't some highfalutin event, that cost a fortune. And from what I understand, there were thousands who crowded into the church, although I question whether that number is accurate because the church probably can't hold that many, but it was wildly successful, as you can well imagine.
So Da Ponte, people will have to watch the film to get the full story, but it's kind of amazing that this guy who was Mozart's librettist, he ends up in New York. He's like working as a grocer and like a humble bookseller. Like what kind of a bizarre journey was this guy on?
If he were a character in a novel, people would probably chastise the author for creating a character who's too over the top. He was born into a Jewish family. He converted to Catholicism at age 14. He lived in a brothel and had a couple of illegitimate children. And then he ran off or was forced to flee Venice, where he grew up. And he went to Vienna, where he met Mozart and became his librettist. But the story doesn't end there. I mean, if it did, it would be a great story. But
yeah.
Da Ponte was almost like a Zelig-like figure who crossed paths with Casanova, with Mozart, with Clement Clark Moore in New York, and he was always courting trouble. He, could never really make a living, and was always in debt, and was always looking for the next thing to sort of take him out of debt. And he was fleeing at one point debtors. He was avoiding debtor's prison in London, and that's what brought him to New York, where he was just trying to make ends meet. And he crossed paths with Clement Clark Moore, who we know is the author of The Night Before Christmas, who realized his genius and helped secure him a position at Columbia as the first professor of Italian literature, which was a fitting end to this wonderful life.
Yeah, I mean, what a great subject for a filmmaker. And there is so much more in this film than just Da Ponte. What first got you into this story?
Well, we had filmed another segment at the church for another documentary that we were working on. And about 3 months later, the person we had interviewed called us and said, we're going to be filming this we're going to be hosting this Italian opera company, and we would love for you all to film it. And, I'm not really a person who knows much about opera music, and my co-directors are, sort of in the same boat. But once we started researching the history of the church and the history of this event, it just became too good to pass up. We're all huge history buffs. And, we thought that there was really a bigger story to tell, and that's, the story of redemption, Da Ponte's redemption, and the story of the immigrant experience, which, makes its way throughout the film.
Well, I hope people will watch this movie. This is Sunday, November 7th. You can catch it here on 9 PBS at 3 p.m. Marianne, in our last couple minutes here, I got to ask you some questions about your background, because part of what made us interested in your story is the fact that you're born and raised right here in the St. Louis area. Is that where your love of movies began?
Yes. I found that the movies growing up were my happy place. And, I would go to the movies with my dad. On Sunday afternoons, he would watch old films on the TV downstairs. And I think partially to avoid doing homework, I'd sneak downstairs and watch with him. And my dad was just amazing. He could identify every minor character in some obscure film. And, we really became a family that loved old films. We still do, although sadly, my dad and my mother, who also enjoyed movies, is no longer with us. But, it was always so much fun also going with friends to the Shady Oak Theater. We could walk to the theater on Saturdays and see movies. And, I just ended up becoming a huge movie buff and was fortunate enough to be able to make a career out of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I understand you also interned at our rival KMOX radio when you were in college. At that point, were you hoping to be a journalist?
I was hoping to be a journalist. I went through lots of different careers before I arrived at my current one. And at one point, I'd hoped to be a journalist. I credit KMOX with teaching me skills of interviewing, how to write a story, a story that someone can actually voice with clear, short sentences and no tongue twisters. And I found that skill really helped in crafting this narration for Scorsese.
Well,
so
it's kind of all come together here. Your love of film and being a journalist and these things sort of bring you to documentaries. I understand after this, just in our final minute here, you have a feature documentary you're putting the final touches on. Give us just a little sneak preview of what that's about.
Well, it's called Forever Endeavor, and it's taken us about 8-9 years to work on it and finish it, so it lives up to its name, taking forever. And it's a film about remembrance and legacy and perhaps the futility of it all. We speak with some well-known people such as Tom Wolfe, the writer, and Robert Osborne, the film historian, and get their views on whether or not they will be remembered forever and whether they care. And, it's just a fun little piece that comes from a place very important to me. My co-director Jonathan Mann and I conceived of this when we lost our parents. Mm-hmm. So, we were questioning whether or not they'd be remembered years from now. And we were interested in doing a film on legacy.
Wow. So a fun little piece, as you say, but that also grapples with a really serious issue and questions of existence. This sounds like a great film, too. Mary Anne Rothberg, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been fun.
And Mary Anne is the co-writer, co-director, and co-producer of The Oratorio, a documentary with Martin Scorsese that airs on 9 PBS at 3 p.m. this Sunday, November 7th. Immediately after, you can enjoy the broadcast of the historic restaging. That's DePonte's Oratorio, a concert for New York. That airs at 4. More information at pbs.org. And let's go out of the show with an overture featured in The Oratorio. This is by the 18th century composer Thomas Arne. This episode was produced by Evie Hemphill, with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, honoring Arbor Day on April 26th, with an ongoing commitment to sustainable stewardship and conservation of Missouri's forests. ChooseWood.com.